What's the we don't talk about that in your family? Story 1. Not my family secret, but my ex-sister-in-law's. This one a bit messy, so bear with. Her dad was a sheikh, claimed to know multiple languages, would make comments about people not wearing headscarves, etc. He tried to force ex-Esil to get married in her teen years to his nephew, but she didn't, and the oldest, less attractive sister married him instead. He had 6 daughters, and my ex-sister-in-law was the most attractive from the bunch, but average-looking outside of that. After the oldest lost her virginity to her husband, he started assaulting her when she was 17 for 6 years. He stopped when she fell pregnant. The kid looks like the oldest sister and the dad. He's dead now, and I doubt she'll ever know that her grandfather might be her real dad. But back to the ex-Sil. As his favorite, when she found out, her justification for everything was that, and I quote, "I was too pretty," and she made it all about her, and the oldest sister had to comfort her. A bit Freudian, but we suspect she wishes it was her. Story 2. My mom's first marriage. She has never told me about, and the one time I asked, she acted like she had no idea what I was talking about. But my dad told me about it when I was in my early 20s, and I eventually confirmed with my grandfather 10 years later. And then, also, around that time I was doing the free trial on Ancestry and found the marriage certificate and the wedding announcement from the newspaper. Mom got married right out of high school, and they were divorced within a year. She just wanted to get out of her folks' house, and I don't blame her for that. Her mother was a narcissistic piece of work, and she was horrible to my mom. Not physically abusive, but intellectually abusive as hell. She did it to me too, but my mom made sure I didn't believe a word Grandma said. Anyway, she met my dad right after the divorce, and they got hitched, had some kids, and divorced 15 years later. Story 3. My father he was probably abused by the church as a child and continued the cycle of abuse. I remember being like 10, and his nephew, who was well into his 30s at the time, used to rent a room in our house. Once night he got really drunk and tried to break into our room, drunk and rambling about what my dad had done to him. My mom helped him jump out of the window, and he came back the next day like nothing happened. Then last year, I found out my 14 to 15-year-old friend in high school used to offer herself at my dad for $20, and he would assault her. I won't say it was consensual because she was a child. I know there had to be more, but I don't think I could bear to find out more than that. He passed away last year, and I spent the last year of his life ignoring him because I couldn't reconcile all of it in my head. It was a lot. It sucks to find out so much about a person you once loved and looked up to, have them pass away without any closure, then beat yourself up about the whole thing when it was them who should have apologized. Story 4. Did some research on my grandparents and learned my grandfather, his siblings and parents were all illegal immigrants to the U.S. Not only that, but they likely were connected to illegal horse gambling rings out of Lexington, Kentucky. They came kinda legally to Canada on work visas from England, but then border jumped to the States. This alone wouldn't bother me, but my family are all right-wing nut jobs that talk constant trash about immigrants. Oh, and also my grandma was half native. And F. Story 5 is now a ward of the state, only around my mom. But we tend to shy away from the story of how my stepbrother ended up in a group home for those who would be a danger to themselves and others. 40-year-old stepbrother is a massive, has held 3 jobs in his entire time on Earth, but has easily dropped well over 5-digit sums on natty ice and mini bottles. Mom would coddle him because nowhere else to go. Well, shocker, he ends up having a seizure after snorting a 30-day supply of in 3 days combined with 2 36-packs of beer from his bedroom when we started yelling at her to stay conscious. Soon as the cops and EMS left, I pulled him aside and started beating him to the point my dad had to put me in a headlock and pull me off. Mom is back home after a stay in the hospital, and now she can't, and thankfully won't, wait on him hand and foot, or go pick him up beer because his ID is expired. We settle right back into get a flipping job or get out. Mom will not save you this time, so like a week or so goes by. I'm playing a game in my room on my day off and hear these like pained moans coming from his room. I hold my nose, open the door, and am greeted to the sight of him butt peach, scissors in hand and halfway through chopping his own cock off. When I try and stop him, he takes a stab at me with the same scissors and came close to catching me in the eye. So I was like, lol nah, you go ahead and finish up. Just gonna call the cops. Part of me hopes they just unload on your psycho Pete. Sadly, they showed remarkable restraint compared to how the LA sheriffs usually behave and ended up pepper spraying him after he tossed the scissors and his own cock at the first 2 through the door. Still tries to call me once or twice a year when they allow phone calls for holidays. I always answer. You dead yet? Oh no, always next year. Story 6. My ex was emotionally abusive to myself and our daughter. My daughter eventually took her life at the end of 23, and we don't talk about the correlations. Story 7. My battles with depression past attempts, my cousin terminating himself to save his wife from caring for him as his terminal illness progressed. My aunt's close relationship assault closeted. Anyone who knows about the above is expected to not ask people to see if they know. Edits removed one in case this gets big and people find out who I am. Story 8. Well, my mother was a prescription candy addict and a serious head case. I was never allowed to let that fact be known outside the immediate family. With great difficulty, I hid it from my friends while growing up. After her death, I looked them all up and said, "Hey, you know what?" Story 9. Getting a DNA test for my niece. My sister-in-law cheated on my brother. She had actually moved out and my brother tried to self-delete. Fortunately, he was not successful. The timing of my niece being born coincides directly with the time my SIL stepped out. There are serious questions as to whether my brother is the father or SIL's side piece is. Somehow they reconciled and went on to have another child a few years later. My son actually brought it up when my parents were in the room one time, and they that down immediate, so intensely that no one dares to bring it up again. My brother passed away January 1st, 2021. Many of the family do suspect that it is entirely possible that he is not father, but it doesn't matter, and she will always be my niece. Story 10. The way I was raised for the first 8 years of my life. I don't understand why they treated me the way they did and why they changed, but the memories are vivid. Lots of smacking, berating, manipulation, emotional neglect, really nasty insults. I had no bodily autonomy and was not allowed to feel any emotions at all. Basically, death by 1,000 cuts. All my memories from then are filled with anxiety, frustration, and confusion. Then, magically, one day when I was 8, they sat me down and apologized. It didn't totally stop right away. There were still the nasty comments now and then, but they were very obviously trying. High school was a brief return to hell, but to be fair, I was a hellion at that age. I've mentioned it exactly once since childhood, and they both seem to conveniently have no memories of the treatment, but I've heard that's a common thing in these situations. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm deeply traumatized and scarred by it, but it did leave a mark. I have trust issues, and am triggered by other people's anger very easily, even when it's not directed at me. I can only assume it was because, for whatever reason, they just didn't like me. And that's a thought I've carried with me into adulthood. They've mentioned I was their practice kid before my 2 younger siblings who got wildly better treatment, but I've always felt like that was a joke. Maybe this is a common thing with firstborn kids, but I obviously will never know for sure. Story 11. The fact my parents were abusive towards me growing up or that they had a favorite kid. If I ever bring this up, I'm seen as the problem. So I just complained to my therapist, LOL. Story 12. My mom's first 2 kids are from her first husband. My dad adopted them, so they aren't his stepchildren. We all shared my dad's last name. We don't talk about my siblings' real dad. My siblings would take great offense to being called adopted. Our dad is our dad, period. Story 13. My cousin was an addict and she lost her job as a pharmacy tech for stealing sweets. We don't talk about it because she's been sober for 2 years now and she's worked so hard on herself. We're all so proud of her and the past is the past. Story 14. That my stepmom slept with and had kids with both my biological father and his brother. And that makes me and my stepsister also cousins. Her trailer park name was Happy Hooker and she still wears that proudly in her 40s. Wrote letters to my uncle while he was deployed with a girlfriend, begging for him to take her back, while my biological father took care of her kids and denied my existence. That is the unspoken. And now that I've left North Carolina, I heard through the grapevine that even bringing up my name around her pisses her week off. So I guess I am also the we don't talk about that, ha ha ha. Story 15. My dad beat the living cow out of me and my brother very frequently. Almost every time he got drunk, he would either slap us till we fell down, haymaker swings at us until we code, jump kick roundhouse kicks us till we code. It was scary every night. Then we both grew bigger than him. I confronted him once when he was about to do it again. It stopped then and there, and we never talked about it since. I'm 40 now, and this happened throughout my childhood well into my late teens. Story 16. Nothing now. We talk about everything. Pretty much nothing is off the table if everyone's consenting to the conversation topic. But one time when I was 4 and my brother was 6, my mom went out to go see friends or something. Then my dad went out to go see friends or something, assuming we were with mom upstairs. I was sitting playing a game quietly in the corner of the main room of the house that he spent most of his time in. We were alone for about half an hour before my brother comes to me in a panic because he couldn't find our adults. I kept a calm head and walked us across a very busy intersection to our babysitter's house. Story 17. The man who I call dad is not my biological father. Bio dad is a pretty cow fella from what I know. He skipped out on me before I was even born, possibly before my mom even knew she was pregnant. My mom always knew whose baby it was, but for whatever reason my dad just refused to acknowledge it, despite both my mom and him being white and I'm visibly Hispanic. Dad's entire side of the family acts like I am biologically related to them to this day and warn me about certain health issues that run in our family. I honestly have no idea if he ever had a conversation with them about it when I was born, or if he just played it off to them somehow. Every time I've tried to bring it up, going as far as showing my ancestry results to him on my computer, he has very little to say, if anything. He has told me he doesn't believe it because apparently my mom told him during an argument. He raised me, and that makes him my dad, regardless of DNA. But sometimes I think it would be nice to address the elephant in the room. Story 18. My mom's pain pill addiction. She was addicted for a couple of years and quit her job because she couldn't stay awake at work. That was a serious rough patch in our family. She got clean quick when her pill buddy got arrested carrying pills not prescribed to her. She started to name names, including my mom. Funny part is the town's police chief's father was the doctor knowingly prescribed pills to addicts. Story 19. My cousin's boyfriend terminated her over a joke her mom played. Not only did he get away with it, but the police helped cover it. The boyfriend's family had ties to the police and lots of money. Story 20. Such heartbreaking stories in here. Wow. It makes me understand why the world is so messed up. I guess I'm very lucky. Story 21. During World War II, my great-grandpa, my grandma's dad, was MIA and presumed dead. So my great-grandma was like, cause they had two small kids already. So she remarried great-grandpa's best friend and had a kid W him. And then great-grandpa came home because he wasn't really dead, and he kicked his friend out and nobody ever talked about it. They had my grandma a few years later. But the middle sister always looked different and had different health issues, and on her deathbed my great-grandma told the truth, and up until then nobody knew except her, great-grandpa, and the best friend. Story 22. That my brother has autism and my parents have chosen to ignore it his whole life BC, it would look embarrassing to others. Story 23. Grandmother was illegitimate way back in 1905 when it was a massive drama. Her father, from a well-to-do family, had been sent to the colonies as he'd impregnated a number of village girls and carried on that behavior in the Pacific. My maternal aunt slept with her brother-in-law, major scandal and divorce way back before it was normal. My own mother had an illegitimate child who was adopted by her sister and grew up as my cousin. She then waited for my father to get divorced and out of jail before marrying him. I could go on and on and on, but they all pretend to be good people and like nothing more than to pick at others' foibles. Have been no contact for a long time now. So peaceful. Story 24. So I found this very strange, but a few years ago my dad got in huge trouble with my uncle and cousins for telling the youngest cousin that his mother, my aunt, had been married before she married my uncle. To be clear, my youngest cousin was nearly 60 years old at the time and my aunt has been dead for 20 years. Story 25. My mom is basically evil. Growing up, she would tell us kids that my dad was horrible and basically assaulted her. But none of us are his. She was chasing after this guy who was kinda AA, and then, one day, at random, she invites my dad who she worked with, a total nerd guy, to come to a party with her. She get him blackout drunk, and then in the morning tells him they had close relationship and now she's pregnant, so he needs to marry her. He's like, pretty sure I'd remember if we had close relationship. But okay, I'll get you an engagement ring. He had a friend who was into metalworking and went and got her favorite gemstone, drew out the design himself, and had his friend make her a custom ring. It was real gold, thick, about $2,500 by weight today, with a one-of-a-kind design and a unique gemstone that was and shaped just for it. She refused to wear it. Ever. Sister gets born, and she's very obviously not the same ethnicity as dad. Like, so obvious that the initial thought is an oopsie at the hospital. This is before DNA testing, early 80s. But the entire family on both sides is like, this isn't his kid. My mom insists that this is her baby, and the hospital confirms this is the baby that came out of her. So, wedding canceled. She quits her job and joins a cult, and leaves the baby with a random older couple she knows. They claim she asked them to babysit for a few hours and then never came back and they couldn't reach her. No cell phones, so they called her home, her family, her work, etc. No one knew where she was. They got CPS involved, and the baby got placed and later adopted. When Big Sis was 2, my mom suddenly wants her back, and court stuff ensues. The judge thinks she's a psycho, but says if she can get the baby's dad to marry her, they'll consider letting her have the kid. So she tracks down my dad and begs, and he feels bad for her, and says okay, he will marry her so she can have her kid back. But he wants nothing to do with her and has a whole life of his own, so he will leave the state and go back to his life once it's done. So they do, and the judge gives her the baby and he bounces. Now, all of that is from family. On both sides, mom and dad will not discuss it. But my grandma, dad's mom, had copies of the court documents and letters, as well as her back-and-forth letters telling my dad that this woman was trouble and not to fall for it all. It gets worse. Story 26. When I was 18, I started dating a 30-year-old. At first, everything was fine, but it didn't take long for the abuse to start. I was still living at home, and my parents would say things like, "They don't like who I've become, EST." Then one day after he strangled me and left marks around my neck, things about the relationship started to unravel. We broke him. But then I did start talking to him again and seeing him secretly. It happened a couple of times and my parents found out both times. I remember my mom saying she was done with me and my dad telling me I deserved to be slapped as I'm stupid. I get they were hurt, but I think the way they handled it probably wasn't the best. As I was in an extreme amount of pain, I was also extremely scared of my abuse ex-boyfriend, and part of me felt like I deserved everything he did to me and believed that my parents felt the same. In the end, I did break up with him and blocked him off everything. It's been 9 years. I'm now happily married with 2 kids and third on the way, plus my parents live with us in an annex. But we have never really spoken about, and there is so much that happened that they don't know about, which can be difficult at times as, although I'm out the relationship and moved on, there is still trauma, and I do still have nightmares about it. My husband is absolutely amazing, has always been so supportive, which helps, but sometimes I wish my parents could have the full story too. Story 27. My first marriage, a disaster that didn't last long. I've remarried and in my 10th year with current wife, but we never talk about my past. I told my siblings and parents to never mention it again ever. Story 28. Anything of substance, and I mean that 100%. No one in my family can hold a conversation. If you ask questions, they get super defensive. Story 29. On my side of the family, nothing. We discuss everything. Nothing is secret. On my husband's side, dear God, the only thing we're certain of is that his sister, are definitely the children of my in-laws. After that, who flipping knows? Story 30. How my step-nephew, stepbrother's kid, his intellectually challenged younger brother. I don't speak to my parents for a reason. I am not allowed back at their house either because I said I would terminate him if I ever saw him again. Story 31. My parents got divorced when I was 3 and then remarried when I was 5, and they had 3 more kids afterwards. I didn't find out this happened until I was in my mid-30s, and my older sister told. My parents still won't talk about it, and I still have no idea what happened, why they divorced or remarried or anything really. I used to have terrible nightmares as a kid. My wife had to put up with me figuring out a lot of separation anxiety and other issues when we first got married. Kinda would have been nice to know some of the root causes of some issues, but hey, I'm still here. Story 32. My grandfather at best being emotionally, psychologically abusive of my grandmother. My parents describe her as going a little cray hen he passed away. I think she finally felt free. My brother being physically abusive towards me most of my life. Never close relationship, but very much beyond the usual bullying type stuff siblings do. My mom claims she never knew about this, and if I ever bring it up, she gets hysterical and acts like I accused her of it. So I just don't. But I've pretty much him out of my life. Story 33. I can't think of anything, really. We talk about absolutely everything and always have. Well, I guess, yeah, the future, kinda. A very specific fact. Everybody passes away. We talk about end-of-life care, wills, who is going to do what for each other, etc. All of that is planned and taken care of. The actual discussion of the moment of death or life after that death for the living, that doesn't exist. It's planned for, but won't happen if you never talk about it kind of thing. My family nearly imploded after my mom passed away because we had to talk about the headstone and if we fill in any part of the spot for my father. The fact his name might be on the headstone freaked half the people out, and the remaining ones had that conversation. When my mom passed, they couldn't talk about any part of it. It freaked them out and broke them down. We all went to make the arrangements. The only one who could make a single decision was me. Not because I have any power or anything, but they never once imagined a reality where this was going to be reality. No one spoke of it. Not once. I was the only one that had, in therapy, when my mother's health was declining. I was the only one who was able to function at all. I was barely functioning, but being able to answer burial rather than cremation, even though we all knew that was what she wanted, was not something they ever once thought they'd have to say. So, they couldn't. The answer came days later for them, but in the moment, they froze. Outside of the idea of the time post-death, we speak about absolutely everything. If it involves being alive, we'll talk about it. Story 34. My mother was orphaned in a car accident when she was 12. Mom, dad, 2 brothers. She was the sole survivor and ended up living with a distant relative. Or so she told us for 60 years. We were researching the title of the some property and who signed a transfer as a witness, but her father, 30 years after the accident. Turns out he wasn't even in the car that night, and he remarried, and had more children, and divorced, and had more children. And they had children. Basically, we have cousins we've never even heard of. She's forbidden us from contacting any of them or talking about them. Something happened back then we have yet to figure out, but it definitely, her lying to us, opened a can of worms. Story 35. I once asked my grandmother's sister, would that be a great aunt, about my dad's dad. She hushed me really quickly without any explanation. Turns out he was quite a shower canoe. I kind of wonder if my grandmother was assaulted by him and they had a shotgun wedding of sorts. He drank a lot. My grandmother left him when my dad was 5 years old. He said his dad would tell him to stick a fork into an electrical outlet to see what would happen. He had no fond memories of his dad. My dad turned out to be a super nice dad. Story 36. The relationship my father had with my stepsister while she was a teenager. Talking about that in my family, whether to support her or to ask why they're still sort of cozy in her 30s, only got me smeared and unwelcome. Story 37. When my mom was 16, she had a kid in another country, and when she left, forced out due to decolonization, she abandoned the kid. We only found out about it because almost 40 years later, all my brothers got invited on a national talk show, which tracked down my sister. Until this day, my mom still swears she didn't abandon my sister and she was kidnapped. Immediately changing the topic when brought up.